*7529 hash for USSD. Panda Pusha Play. Players must be 18 years or older. Play responsibly. Ituba is the proud operator of the National Lottery.
Talking Finance with Brian Hirsch, making sense of your finance.
Brian, before we start taking some of our listeners' questions, and of course, you can dial in 086 000 2032. That's the number to dial for our studio line, 086 000 2032. On the WhatsApp voice note line, 0614 104 107. That's why I'll take your voice notes and text messages. So, Brian, you also wanted to talk about people that are overinsured.
No, I wanted to talk about the most alarming of people underinsured, are people with ages of 25 to 29. Mm-hmm. So let me say, that's when insurance costs the least, when you're young, you're healthy. And the second thing is that's when you have families. Mm-hmm. And your children are growing, although in so many cases your children are still growing when you're older. But if you're underinsured between 25 to 39, that's alarming, because that's the group of people who should be adequately insured, having done the job. You'd also mentioned people who gave up policies during COVID. Yeah, people who'd paid for years and had jobs and don't have jobs, and that's the difficulty. I also like to add, remember, if you're working for a company and you're a member of a pension or provident fund, the chances are you have life insurance under the scheme. Find out from your employer what cover you have, so you don't need to be... Obviously, if you leave the company, you lose the cover. But find out what cover you've got to add to any other cover to understand what you covered in. And with the cover both in terms of your retirement fund and your own, you may be adequately insured. But check up on that.
On the issue of smoking, Brian, sometimes smokers will talk about how there's like grades of being a smoker. You have those that will say that they are heavy smokers. You have those that say, no, I'm just a social smoker. Does insurance take that into account?
No.
So the person who smokes one cigarette once every 3 or 6 months is penalized the same way that somebody who smokes a pack a day?
If you disclose under the policy that you smoke. I know of a smoker, I actually spoke to them this weekend, how many cigarettes you smoking a month? They said 12. I worked out he's paying 4,000 Rand more for insurance because he's a smoker. I divided that by 12 and I worked out that he's actually 333 Rand a cigarette, over and above the cost of the cigarette by being a smoker for 12 cigarettes a month.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a serious saving.
And I need to also check up with vaping. Mm-hmm. That's also something that I haven't thought about, vaping. I'll find out with that as well.
All right. And then with the disability cover, Brian, because nobody lives life expecting the worst. And so how does one know when they're adequately covered, especially for disability?
Well, if you're a self-starter and you've got your own business and or a professional, you need to understand this is how much I earn, this is what it costs me to live, and if I get disabled, I want to replace my income through having a disability policy. Other people can say, well, I can't afford, because it's called income replacement, and depending on you take waiting periods. You can say, I'm going to take a waiting period of a month, which means I won't get paid for the first month, but then I'll get paid until I go back to work, either temporarily or permanently. You need to do those calculations. The longer you take as a waiting period, say, for example, if you're an estate agent and your commissions come in over a number of months, you may take a 6-month waiting period because I've got money coming in as the sales get finalized. If you're a lawyer or a doctor, you may want to take 7 days waiting period. So it all depends. Everyone's got different set of circumstances. Just do the numbers. Speak to your family members. Maybe we haven't got as many young listeners listening to our program, but you as parents, you as grandparents, just ask your children, are you adequately covered? Is there enough if something happens to you to cover the debt, the education of the children? It's a good conversation piece, and only you can get that message through to your children.
All right, let me bring in Tabo. Tabo, you're calling us from Shawelo. Good morning.
Morning, Ms. Cathy. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Morning, Mr. Brand.
Good morning to you.
Yes, I just wanted to find out something. Actually, I was working at Ballowell as a technician, motor technician, and then I got permanent disability on my eye. And we had this insurance that I was paying, AIG. And then what they did, they only paid off only my house. So I just wanted to find out, do they supposed to maybe pay me also monthly after they paid my house off, or was they only reliable only for the house only?
Yeah. Look, obviously you had a capital disability, and because of permanent disability, they paid out the capital sum. It's probably not what we call income replacement, which is another type of disability which covers you for your. How old are you now?
No?
How old are you?
Now I'm 48.
And are you getting no disability payment from Barlow's?
Nothing.
So Barlow's obviously only had a capital disability. Are you considered permanently disabled?
Yes, I'm permanent.
Okay. Well, you know, again, maybe your pension fund, and you need to go back to Barlow's, because who's AI? I know AIG are a company, but were they the insurers under the Barlow scheme? You need to go. Were they? Well, you need to go back to the HR department at Barlow's and find out why there was no income replacement. Because when you were boarded, then often a company has a policy that covers those individuals for future income until retirement, and at the same time, out of the disability benefit, it continues to contribute to the pension fund. What happened to your pension fund contributions?
They only give me the lump sum of 1 million only.
So they gave you the value of the fund. Well, unfortunately, it appears that Barlow's did not have any income disability. But I tell you what I will do. I'll put a call through to Barlow's for you. I'll give an answer next week, just to ask them why their pension fund doesn't have an income disability, only pays out the lump sum. How long were you with Barlow's for?
I worked there for 16 years.
How many?
As a motor mechanic. 16 years.
16 years. Okay.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to ask my producer to take you back, get your phone number, and I'll see what I can do to help.
Yes, help me.
Okay. But just making the point. So the company, some funds. I know the pension fund we had running for our staff. We had a staff member boarded, permanently disabled. They got an income till age 65,
Wow.
and part of that income went to continue contributing to their retirement fund, and at 65 they got paid out their retirement fund. It was a lot less than the income protection, but it gave them a monthly income to replace the income. But you know, as I said, there's income replacement, there's a capital payment in the event of occupational death, and then there's capital payment in the event of permanent and total disability. So, and the different, you can imagine, income disability costs a lot more than capital payment in the event of any occupation disability.
Yeah, I guess, you know, as I'm listening to Thabo, one of the things that is coming out for me is that we also have to, you know, take the initiative, especially when you listen to a show like this and you have just that much more information that you've been empowered with, to try and follow up and make sure that you understand what some of the benefits that would be due to you, even in the instance of disability, like Thabo. Because if we don't know, then we can't plan and we can't prepare adequately for it.
Yes, and also the employee bodies should put some pressure on companies to ensure that the companies under the pension fund, and they can be part of the pension fund or separate the pension, have group life and disability. And disability should definitely include, because it's not a high cost, simply because very few people get disabled. But you'd be amazed how many people suffer from disability. So employee bodies should put pressure on the employers to say, why don't we have sophisticated disability cover. And what is our group life? Because group life is often 2 times salary, 3 times salary. So I don't know exactly with Tava, but I'll make some inquiries.
All right. Anonymous, you're in East London. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy and Brian.
Good morning.
Yes, I would like to ask a quick one here. The reason why I put anonymous is that I actually don't know how my company will react. So that's why I didn't want to reveal my name. Okay. My company, they offer. We actually got a company employee share. I would like to find out in what condition will it be taxed at a marginal tax rate or at 20%? Because I believe shares are not taxed at a marginal tax rate, taxed at 20%. And now I would like to find out if it's a company share, in what condition will it be taxed at marginal tax rate or at 20%?
Okay, so the question for other listeners is, if you have a company share and you make a profit, will it be treated as income or will it be treated as a capital gains tax? In my opinion, it's a capital gain, and capital gains works on the following basis: 40% of the gain. Firstly, you've got your gain when your share matures. The first 40,000 of that gain in any tax year can be deducted from the gain. Then your gain is taxed at 40% of the gain. So 40% of the gain that you've made is taxable and added to your taxable income, and therefore the maximum tax rate based on that is 18%. But that doesn't mean you're in that only if you're in a 45% tax bracket. 45% of 40%, which is the 40% that's going to be taxed, comes to 18%. If you're in a tax bracket of 25%, then 25% of that gain, 18% will be taxed, which will only be around about 10%. So it depends on your taxable income, but it's capital gains tax, and that 40% of the gain is added to your taxable income, and then you're taxed at marginal rates. Hope that helps.
Anonymous, you still there?
Yes, it will help. It will help. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, Anonymous. MD, you're in Port St. John's. Good morning.
Morning, Brian. Good morning to the guys in the studio and
Morning.
to all the SFN listeners.
Morning.
Brian, the lady mentioned something about people who are charged for having taken cover for some people, and they are suspected. They are charged for killing those people. My two questions are then, is it legal or ethical for me to take a cover for someone without his or her knowledge?
The answer is
That is
no,
why.
it's not legal.
Then two, how do I go about to check who has taken a life cover on my name?
Look, firstly, it would be very inappropriate of any insurance company to allow someone to take out a policy on your life without getting all the information, why they are affecting the policy on your life, and both you and that individual would have to sign the application. But I don't need to tell you, we know with fraud in South Africa, it's rife all over the world, and South Africa, fraudsters are always trying to get on top of, always looking for new schemes. They spend 24/7 trying to scam and catch other people's money. So there's no way you can find it out, but it would be very wrong of any insurance company. We have had that question raised some months ago, to take on anyone without understanding. Let me explain to you. To take a policy on anyone's life, you have to have what's called an insurable interest. An insurable interest means a reason why. For example, I lend you money, I can explain to the insurance company I'm taking out a policy on your life because if you die, how am I going to recoup my money? And therefore I can have a policy on your life. If I'm in partnership with someone and we've got shares in a company and one of the partners dies, it's legal for me to have a policy on that other partner's life in terms of what we call a buy and sell arrangement, which says that I will automatically be forced to buy your shares and pay the cash to your family for the shares in the business. If you've got a key man in your business and your key man is critical to the business, that doesn't make the managing director or financial director key. It may be a technician with a particular skill. The company is entitled to ask the key man person, we'd like to take out a policy in your life. If something happens to you, at least we can replace you. That money is there to replace you. So insurable interest is the crux. And most companies, when you take out policies, will insist that there's an insurable interest and want to understand why there's an insurable interest, and both parties need to confirm that. But, with fraud, to take a policy on your life, there's nothing you can do if it sneaks through. And I can tell you right now, unfortunately, if it does sneak through, often, if companies find that out, they will not pay out the claim. So it's no point taking out a policy on someone's life and hoping and thinking and maybe we'll get paid out. The insurance companies have very good investigative departments. They fully understand, but there's always something that sneaks through. As you say, Cathy, there have been cases.
Then my question would be, these insurances, isn't there a higher body or council where in cases of this nature, where we are becoming aware that there is this dirty thing that is going on, can't we be able to check who has taken the cover for you? Should we just sit back and wait while we are aware that there is this problem?
Look, there are 10, 12 companies in South Africa. They're selling millions of policies every year between them. I don't know how you would check up, because if you ask a company if there's a policy on my life, remember, you're not the owner of that policy and you don't have any authority. The companies won't give you that information because they, under POPI, which is Protection of Personal Information Act, they want to make sure that they're dealing with the person who owns the policy. Someone buys a policy on your life, they are the owner. And whereas you could say, I wouldn't know how you would check up with an insurance company. You'd have to write to the company, no, you're not going to get anywhere. Is there any reason why you're concerned that maybe someone's taken out a policy on your life?
It's because of what we see happening. People are getting killed, and the person is taking the policy for that one.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, MD. Thanks for calling in. I hope that Brian's advice helped out. So we're going to take... Look, it looks like we were going to go to Cathy as well, but it looks like we've lost Cathy on the line. Cathy, please do call back in. I know that you wanted to speak to Brian on an urgent matter. Peter and Bloom, I also see your call. We've got lots of WhatsApp voice notes and text messages to also try and cover. So we'll do that on the other side of this break.
The Bright Stars are on a massive mission to brighten the mood of the South Sudanese citizens with victory. But Bafana Hugo Bros say they have already bought an extra flight ticket to travel back home with 3 points. This is the Total Energies AFCON 2025 qualifier. Witness the beauty of African football. South Sudan tackle South Africa on Tuesday, 10 September at 2:30 p.m. Live on SABC 1 and SABC radio stations. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
Weeknights on S3 are anything but ordinary. BBC Primetime brings you the best of British television from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. You love drama? Then step into the world of Luther as he cracks down on criminals terrorizing the streets of London Monday to Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Top Gear will have you falling in love and rolling in laughter as Jeremy Clarkson and his team take you on an automotive journey like no other, Monday to Wednesdays at 10 p.m. Channel your best entertainment with BBC Primetime, only on S3. Open up.
S3. Mzansi, the Powerball jackpot can't be missed this Tuesday with a huge 100 million rand estimated jackpot. Don't get left behind. Be in it to win by playing Powerball for an estimated 100 million rand jackpot today. Buy your tickets now in store on nationallottery.co.za, the mobile app, cell phone banking, or simply dial *120 *7529 hash for USSD. Panda Pusha Play players must be 18 years or older. Play responsibly. Ituba is the proud operator of the National Lottery.
Talking Finance with Brian Hirsch, making sense of your finance.
Peter, you're in Bloom. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. Good morning, Brian.
Morning, Peter.
Yeah, Brian, please advise me here. My wife passed away in 2019. She was working for government. So I've been receiving this money from GEPF called spousal benefit. Now the problem is that every financial year, SARS will always saying they are combining that that benefit with my salary. It will increase my tax bracket. Every year I'm owing SARS. I go to make arrangement to say they must increase that money, but still it looks like there's no solution. I even said to some point they must stop that spousal benefit, because every year they will be telling me that when they calculate, you remember that money is also taxed monthly as well. I'm not even sure how it's calculated, how the amount I'm receiving, how it's calculated, but each and every year SARS says we are combining the two, and they are saying I'm gonna, as long as I'm receiving that spousal benefit, I'm gonna owe SARS for the rest of my life. I went to them to say take half of the portion of the amount so that the tax can be low, but still it doesn't change anything. Can you advise? I've written to the ombudsman. I've gone to every office trying to resolve the matter, but still every year at the end of the financial year I'm owing SARS as a result of the money that I don't even know how it's calculated.
Peter,
I don't know.
Peter, are you not getting a tax certificate at the end of each financial year which shows how much the pension paid to you, because you were getting a spouse pension, which obviously would have been reduced at the time of the death of your wife? I'm sorry to hear that you've lost your wife, but you would, at the end of each year, you would be getting, I think, 50% or 75% of her pension. Now, when they pay you the pension, they don't know what other income you've got. And that's why you have to do a tax return. But it can't be that difficult when you say you want to give it up. You definitely don't want to give it up because you're not paying it all away in tax. The maximum you could be paying. Can I ask you what you earn, Peter? What do you earn?
Per annum?
Yeah.
It's more than 7 something. 710.
700,000.
Yes.
Okay. And how much is the pension?
The spousal benefit that I'm receiving.
Yeah.
Initially, I was receiving 6.9. Then I said they must reduce it so that they add to 5,000 rand. Now it's just 5,000 rand.
Okay, well, they're only reducing it because you're paying tax. Now, you should be paying on this spousal pension approximately 35% to 40% tax. So if you're getting 84,000 rand a year, your tax payable is 32,000 rand. That's what you should be paying. What is SARS asking you for a year?
The SARS, they are saying at the end of the financial year, they are combining that spousal
benefit. Yes, I understand that.
To it.
And what are they asking you for?
They keep saying I should increase the amount to be deducted by GEPF.
Correct.
So when I ask how much, they can't be specific.
Okay, well, I'm saying to you, you should go back. You should go back to the Government Employee Pension Fund and ask them, please, to deduct from the. Firstly, if you're only getting 5 and you're meant to get 6.9, someone's deducting 1,900 rand. So you need to find out.
Yes.
And I can't help you with Government Employee Pension Fund. I've got no ability. I can't get hold of anyone. It's an absolute nightmare. So I feel very sorry for anyone who's employed by the government who's trying to get information on their pension. But you should, if you were getting 6.9, I would say you should be getting around about 4,100 rand after tax. So you should ask government to deduct from the 6.9 around about 40%, around about, I would say, to 472, around about 2,500 rand a month. And they will then pay that over to the SARS and you won't have a problem. But don't for one moment think of giving up the pension because you're not paying it all away in tax. But that's what you need. You need to go back to the Government Employee Pension Fund, find out what are they giving you, what are they deducting, and ask them to increase that in terms of making sure that come the end of the year you don't owe SARS any money. Or alternatively, you need to set aside that extra money that you're getting and put it into a savings account so you've got it ready to pay SARS when they call for it.
All right. No, thanks.
Thanks, Peter.
Okay. All right, Peter. All the best. Brian, I've got a question here from somebody who's self-employed. They want to know what's the best, should they take life cover and retirement annuity? What is the best cover in case of death, disability, and they have dependents and minors?
Yeah, look, very simply, don't confuse retirement annuity with life cover and disability. We talk about what are the important things. First is protection for families in the event of premature death, and then we talk living too long, not having a retirement. So they're two different components. They both make up a financial plan, but starting, you need, what is the best cover? You need to talk to someone who can give you advice. They need to look around the markets because there are different policies with different benefits from different companies, so you need to check up on that. But, you're self-employed. The first thing is, if you're self-employed, what happens if you die to your business? That's something you need to think about, and then you need to work out how much cover do you need, how old are your children, how much money will your wife need, what debt you've got, and then if you want to be covered for disability, and depending again on your age, you didn't mention the age, the caller did, Cathy? Didn't mention age. Okay, depending on the age, you get different quotes. And remember, there are different premium patterns. Let me share this with you. Some policies go up every year. Other policies have level payments, and others have a percentage increase. So you need to get, you can't do this on your own. You need to get hold of a financial planner and ask them to look at your life insurance and disability and advise you. And most important, if you're self-employed, what happens to your business if you die? Do you owe money? Is your business saleable? Is there someone who will take over the business? What will happen?
That's all we have time for today. So sorry to all our listeners, especially for those that we couldn't get to on the WhatsApp line. Unfortunately, that's all we were able to cover for today.
Cathy,
Brian,
they can get hold of me.
Yes.
If we weren't able to take your call, my number is 011-880-4888. Myself or one of my colleagues will get back to you. Please give all your numbers and also let us know where you're calling from and just a brief description. 011-880-4888.
Always a pleasure, Brian. Until next week, that's where we'll leave it with Talking Finance. It's 11 o'clock. Time for your latest news.
Thanks, Cathy. The top stories this hour: the NPA granted access to the Zondo Commission database and plans to ban children using social media in Australia. A very good morning to you. The Justice Department has announced that it will grant the NPA access to the Zondo Commission database. The information would involve the documentation of investigations generated through the course of the former Chief Justice Raymond Zondo's inquiry on state capture. The department's DG, Dr. Mashabane, briefed the media alongside the NPA in Cape Town.
Part of the understanding was that, the capabilities will be made available for law enforcement agencies of the Republic for utilization post the Commission. Since the department is the custodian of the Commissions Act, and all the work that commissions from time to time do administratively get supported by the department in many ways. It was agreed that such assets will be transferred to the department for management.
The corruption case of former Sports, Arts and Culture Minister Zizi Kodwa and his co-accused Jahan McKay has been postponed to the 3rd of next month. The case has been postponed to allow the Director of Public Prosecutions to make a decision in relation to McKay's representations. Kodwa's counsel, however, Zola Majavu, has decried the delays and submitted that they were ready for trial and that his client suffered irreparable harm from the delays.
We placed on record that on behalf of Mr. Kodwa, we are trial ready. My client is an office bearer who, as a result of this spurious case, has had to resign, which he respects. Now we are in a situation where he is co-charged, but the net impact of all of this ping pong, it has a direct impact on him. I did give an advance warning that if come today, there are delays that have absolutely nothing to do with my client, we may wish to reconsider our position.
The creators of The Showerhead, a documentary which chronicles the life and work of globally recognized political cartoonist Jonathan Zapiro, have successfully challenged the punitive age rating given to the film. The film, which is scheduled to be released in South Africa on Friday, has been given a lower age rating of 13 with language and sexual violence. The creators of the film approached the appeals tribunal last week to challenge the initial rating of 16 with language, nudity, prejudice and sexual violence imposed on the film. Kenny Mapanga reports.
Creators challenged this, contending that this was an abuse of classification powers and that the rating robbed a key audience of the message of the film, which is described as a celebration of the constitutional protection of free speech in democratic South Africa in the face of intense political pressure. Creators have since welcomed the change in classification, with Zapiro adding that the initial rating was prudishly restrictive and an underestimation of teenagers' ability to understand satire and to engage with difficult issues.
A farm owner and his 3 workers are expected to appear in the Middelburg Magistrates Court in Mpumalanga for the alleged kidnapping and assault of 2 people accused of stealing sheep from the farmer. Police found the remains of people burnt beyond recognition on the R535 road. The remains are suspected to be those of the victims. Provincial Police Commissioner Zephyr Mkhwanazi says the remains have since been sent to a laboratory for testing.
One was arrested by Limpopo and was actually brought back to us as well. However, we have managed to get the remains of the people who were actually killed. We caught them, and after they burned them, and their bodies or remains were dropped with a bag next to the pool. Tire was placed on top of it and was burned again. And we managed to get them, and we have actually handed over to forensic laboratory people to work on it and be able to see if they can analyze it and see if we can definitely link them properly to the matter at hand.
And Australia's Prime Minister has announced plans for a ban on children using social media. China, France and several states in the US have passed laws aimed at restricting minors' use of social media amid concerns over online harms ranging from cyberbullying to unrealistic beauty standards. The BBC's Phil Mercer has more.
Anthony Albanese says parents are worried sick about the impact social media is having on young people. New laws would ban many children in Australia from various platforms. The minimum age is yet to be determined, but it's expected to be between 14 and 16. Age verification and facial recognition software could be used to uphold the ban. The Prime Minister insists he's prepared to muscle up against the big technology companies to ensure they help to enforce the legislation.
Recapping the top story this hour, the Justice Department has announced that it will grant the NPA access to the Zondo Commission database. For SAFM News, Gemudupi Makhalemele.
The breakers of the barriers have demonstrated that bravery, courage and excellence often exceed any boundaries and limits. This exhilarating moment is the 19th edition to celebrate and honor the tangible impact of women in sport. Experience the Momentum G-Sport Awards 2024 on Thursday, 12 September at 6:30 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4 and reports on SABC radio stations. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
When self-made billionaire Wilton Knight rescues police detective Lieutenant Michael Long after a near-fatal shot to the face, he gives him a new identity and a new name, Michael Knight. Paired with the unique Knight Industries 2000 aka kit, they are brought in during situations where direct action might provide the only feasible solution. Kusazo Shuba and Michael Knight and Kit are ready to rise to the occasion. Channel your best retro with Knight Rider, weekdays at 12 p.m. only on S3. Open up.
S3.
This Heritage Month, SAFM invites you to celebrate the rich tapestry of our nation's diverse cultures. From the vibrant beats of our traditional music to the flavors of our unique cuisines, every culture tells a story of strength, unity, and identity. We honor the heroes and heroines who laid down their lives for our freedom, reminding us that our shared heritage is what makes us strong. Together as one, we celebrate who we are because our culture is our identity. This Heritage Month, let's celebrate every culture, every story, and every voice. The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Good morning, Cathy. Hope you're well in this cold weather. It's Anonymous from PMB. As far as Mr. Steenhuisen's maneuverings are concerned, let me give this quote by Alfred Adler. It is easier to fight for one's principles than to live up to them. That's all. Have a good night. Bye. Have a good day.
Morning, Sister Cathy. I saw that trending video for that patient from Helen Joseph Hospital, and it's true. We always complain about this. There's a lot of across the country, a lot of doctors, also nurses, who treat patients like that, and it's very, very painful. I think everyone who's listening now, especially who use the government hospital, have experienced what I'm talking about. So I think that department, if they can do as the Department of Correctional Service did, to visit the prisons like unexpected, I think that will be a good idea, as well as the Mr. Tatam Corners it used to do here in KZN. I think if they can do that, the Department of Health, they can visit the hospitals unexpected. I think they can see lots of wrongdoings by the nurses and the doctors happening out there. Thank you. It's Qenqa Shibase kwaQathaza eXhobo.
I'm saying these politicians, they like to comment things happening to the ruling party, saying they'll do the opposite, guessing the opposite will be correct. But it's like commenting on a player who is playing football. You sitting in the terraces, you'll be saying, this guy should have headed the ball into the net. It's so easy. It looks so easy when you are saying it. But when you are in the pitch, you notice that it is difficult. At least the guy who was doing to his best. So these politicians, they must stop commenting on things happening to the ruling parties until they are in the same position.
All right, you're listening to The Talking Point. Welcome to the third and final hour of the show. Coming up in this hour, we'll be in conversation with really a globally renowned thinker, climate activist, and also author, Amitav Ghosh. The University of Witwatersrand, the Presidential Climate Commission, and the University of Pretoria are hosting him. And later this afternoon, he's set to give a lunchtime seminar, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor seminar, on the intimations of apocalypse, catastrophic and gradualist imaginings of the planetary future. Now, if all of that sounds confusing, well, what he's going to do is unpack the historical and political roots of climate change, very much linked to what he's been able to do as an author and in his work as a climate activist. Amitav Ghosh, good morning to you. It's a pleasure to have you on the show this morning. And I won't say welcome to South Africa because you've been here before, but welcome back home.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind of you. Yes, I've been here twice before and always had a wonderful time. So thank you very much.
Let's talk about your session that you'll be hosting this afternoon, but I think also more broadly the work that you have been doing in trying to raise or ring the alarm when it comes to climate change and the effect that it's having on our societies and on our globe. You've, of course, done this in what some may see as an unconventional measure, which is through your storytelling.
Yes. You know, I never feel very comfortable being described as an activist because I really am not. I mean, I know what activists do, and that's not what I do. I mean, look at Greta Thunberg. I mean, she's getting herself arrested. She's protesting on the streets and things like that. And that's not what I do at all. I'm just a writer. I write books and I write sometimes articles and essays. But activism takes a huge investment of time, and I can't really do that at this point in my life. But certainly, my books have inspired a lot of activists. So in that sense, I could say that I've contributed a little bit. I think many of the young activists of Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future and so on have cited my work, and they use my work in their meetings and so on. So yeah, that's something I feel very grateful for, because I do think that at this moment we are facing an incredible planetary crisis, and it's not just all about climate change. It's many different kinds of crises, as was made clear to us during the COVID pandemic, and we are completely unprepared, and we're just not paying attention.
You have this conflation, as you're talking about it, as of a multiplicity of issues. In your storytelling and the essays that you've written that have pushed thinking, I think not just that of activists, but that of academics too, and governments, which is why we're also, hosting you in the country. You've really dug deep into the history and trying to understand what the root causes are of climate change. Have you always had a bit of an obsession with history? Before I bring it to, your views on colonialism, your views on capitalism, and how you believe that those are also at the heart of the climate crisis that we're facing.
Yes, that's absolutely the case. I mean, I am very deeply interested in history. But what's interested me very much about the planetary crisis that we're in right now is that people always talk about it as being something in the future, climate change affecting us in the future and so on. And of course, we can see now that that's not the case at all. We are already experiencing terrible impacts all around the world. Heat waves, droughts, superstorms. So, it's absolutely in the present that we're experiencing these impacts. And I think where my view diverts from that of, say, most scientists who study climate change in relation to the future, I really see climate change or the planetary crisis more generally as being part of a pattern of history, of a pattern of economy, of a pattern of colonialism that has really sort of evolved over a period of 300 or 400 years.
I want to illustrate this through one of the works that you've produced, which is The Nutmeg. And of course, you have a book titled The Nutmeg's Curse, Parables for a Planet in Crisis. And nutmeg, of course, is a spice that so many of us have in our households. Some people like it in their oats, and it's used in stews and all sorts of other things that people can whip up in a kitchen. But it's your analogy of the nutmeg that I think really helps to paint a picture of what you're talking about.
Yes, I think we all have nutmeg in our houses, and we don't pay much attention to it. But actually, South Africa has a sort of important connection with the history of the nutmeg. Because what happened with the nutmeg is that, for the nutmeg has existed for millennia. It's been traded for millennia. But before the 18th century, every single nutmeg in the world came from a single place, which is the Banda Islands. And very few people have even heard of the Banda Islands today. But the Banda Islands are this tiny little cluster of islands in the extreme east of Indonesia, near Papua and so on. It's in an area called Maluku, which used to be known as the Malaccas or the Spice Islands. Now, the Bandas the nut produces nutmeg, and it also produces mace, which is the outer covering of the nutmeg. So these two were incredibly valuable spices, and in the Middle Ages, 16th century, 15th century, a handful of nutmeg could buy you a house in Amsterdam. So when the Europeans entered the Indian Ocean at the end of the 15th century, they headed straight for the Spice Islands because these were the most valuable spices and they wanted to control them. So they went to the Banda Islands and they tried to establish a monopoly control over nutmeg. But for about 100 years, they didn't succeed. Then in 1600, the Dutch East India Company, which was then the dominant maritime power, went to the Banda Islands and they tried to impose a treaty upon the people of the Banda Islands, declaring a monopoly over nutmegs. But the Bandanese, resisted, of course. I mean, they'd been trading in nutmeg for centuries. They had trading partners all across the Arab world, in India, in China, and so on. So they couldn't just stop trading with those people, and so they resisted. And eventually, in 1621, the Dutch East India Company, under the leadership of the then Governor General of the Dutch East Indies, a man called Jan Pietersen Koen, he went to the Banda Islands with a fleet and an army that he had assembled. And he basically exterminated the Bandanese. I mean, there were very few. The Bandanese were not a very large number of people. There were just 15,000 people. He basically, enslaved about a third of them, killed about another third, and drove another third into the mountains where they perished of disease and so on. So it's a ghastly story. I mean, literally in the space of a few months, he depopulated the Banda Islands and then replaced the population by handing over plantations to Dutch-descended planters, and then the Dutch VOC supplied them with slaves for the next couple of 100 years. And this went on really for centuries. So, if you look at the whole story of the nutmeg, what it is that this tree, this amazing sort of tree of life, which made the Bandanese a rich and prosperous people. I mean, they were really a flourishing island civilization. But literally in the space of a few months, they were just wiped out. So this is a very good, the tree which had been their tree of life became their tree of death. So this is a very good example of what we might call the resource curse. And really what we are seeing in the planetary crisis of today is exactly this resource curse at a planetary scale. We've been, pumping up fossil fuels for now a century and a half. And the fossil fuels have been producing these greenhouse gases, which are now really, raising global temperatures. But more than that, we can also see how the extractivist model of economy has really cursed so many parts of the world. I mean, you look at Iraq, you look at Libya, you look at the Niger Delta. So, these things, these extraordinary gifts of the earth have really sort of assumed a new sort of form for us now, where they've become curses that we have to live with.
Often when we think about colonization, we look at it as the impact that it had on people and the human suffering that it inflicted upon people. Yes, many people, of course, dislocated from land that was theirs, but it is ultimately the human suffering that seems to take center stage. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking about, well, there's, of course, also the environmental impact of what that has done. Do you think that that is something that we have to highlight more and more, because the violence that people experienced, including the example of the nutmeg, is also the violence that the environment experiences, is the violence that is the destruction that the environment experiences too?
The important aspect of colonization, which is not really discussed as much as it should be, was that colonization was essentially, in many ways, an environmental project. And this is something that we can see in, most of all, in the Americas. So when the British, especially the British and the Dutch, reached North America, especially the northeast part of the coast, they found this very thickly forested, swampy land, which was inhabited by Native Americans who lived there and who actually flourished, from this land. But for the British and the Dutch, these lands were very threatening. They hated the thickness of the forests, and most of all, they hated the swamps. So they immediately set about draining the swamps, deforesting the land, introducing livestock of various kinds. Now, these environmental interventions were also actually interventions. They were a kind of warfare. It was through livestock, for example, that Native American ways of life were destroyed, and that's a process that hasn't stopped. If you look today at the terrible threats that, let's say, the Amazon is facing, it's all because of livestock, because, what they want to do is to create this giant sort of cattle farm and soya farms in the Amazon. And that will absolutely lead to a complete disaster for the earth, because the Amazon is one of the world's great carbon sinks. It's what helps us adjust to this environment. So if the Amazon does disappear like this, it's going to be a catastrophe for all of humanity, for the entire globe. But again, we have to stress that this is, in a sense, the logical development of a pattern of colonization that goes back to the 17th century.
You don't just root your arguments in colonization, but also in capitalism. And of course, the global system now, I think it's widely accepted to be operating under a capitalist system. And what that has also done is that it has really increased the consumer culture that we have. And so people are more centered on their conveniences, on having things easily available, on sort of just having a present and a future that is powered up, almost regardless of what that means. What do you think are some of the dangers of where we are right now?
Well, in my view, I think the planetary crisis is essentially a crisis of culture, and it's a culture that's been profoundly shaped by capitalism. And by the forms of historical linkage with colonization and so on. I think it's widely recognized. This is now widely recognized. It's recognized that markets are not going to provide a solution to the planetary crisis. They've tried all kinds of ways of providing market solutions. None of them have worked. And in my view, they are not going to work, because the patterns of consumerism that we've all imbibed really drive, forms of production, forms of wastage that are incredibly harmful. I mean, the average number of times that people wear a garment today is just 6 times. People buy new clothes, wear them 6 times, and then just throw them away. And they aren't even disposed of as they used to be once upon a time, because nobody wants these clothes. I mean, there's just too many clothes out there. So they just get thrown away. They get thrown into, they get dumped. So one of the huge problems really is wastage. How much wastage we have. So or you take something like, let's say, lawns. Now the idea of the lawn is kind of invented in England in the 18th century, with a certain idea of gardens and good living and so on. And then it gets exported around the world, so that people in California, which is a very water-stressed area, they want lawns. People in Arizona, which is actually a desert, which is fed entirely by one single river system from the Colorado, which is now drying up, but they want lawns. People in Abu Dhabi, which is actually a desert, they want lawns. People in Australia, or for that matter, you take Johannesburg, which is really on the edge of a desert. But even here, people want want lawns of a certain kind. Now, just imagine how destructive this is. And why do we even want lawns? In the past, people who lived in water-stressed areas didn't want lawns. They planted, let's say, a date palm, which fed them, which gave them shade, and they watered this palm, with what little water they had. But, since especially the last 50, 60 years, we've just learned to waste water at a rate which is absolutely shocking. And, you know that much better than I do, because after all, Cape Town faced such a major water shortage crisis not very long ago. And I believe Johannesburg faces a similar crisis.
And I guess it comes back to that crisis of culture that you've pointed to, Amitav, that even we as consumers perhaps don't think deeper about the things that we want. And you ask, why do people want lawns? Well, because we want the picture of a white picket fence and green lawns, and that's almost what we've been socialized into aspiring into. And so much of our lives today is also on this aspirational aspect, that this is sort of the this is the ideal type that we should be after.
It's exactly that. That's exactly what I'm saying. It's a crisis of culture. Because again, it's a crisis of our desires. The disaster that we're producing upon the world ultimately can be traced back to our desires. But the desires are also produced by patterns of culture. So everybody sort of thinks of, a Jane Austen world where, people have these gardens and these lawns that they want to have. And no matter where they are or how unsuitable the landscape, they want to put in those lawns. They want to live in a certain way, and this achieves a certain kind of dynamic. Once upon a time, people used to say that the American family was like a two-car family, so people would have two cars. Now, the American way of life has been presented to the world for many decades as the ultimate form of human life and human living. But, one of the strange things that's happened from this is, let's ask ourselves that if everybody, let's say in India or Indonesia or China were to have two cars, what would that lead to? We would immediately asphyxiate.
I'm going to pause you there. We're going to have an opportunity to continue with this conversation shortly. Time for the latest headlines.
Thanks, Cathy, and a very good morning to you. With the news headlines, the Justice Department has announced that it'll grant the NPA access to the Zondo Commission database. Parliament's Basic Education Portfolio Committee has expressed concern on the impact that budget cuts will have on the quality of schooling. And Metro Police's swift action has led to the arrest of 4 suspects following reports of extortion at a total garage construction site in Marshalltown in Joburg. A full news update at midday.
Stams and Nigati have a secret plan to grab maximum points, but the Eagles refuse to travel back to West Africa empty-handed. The South confronts the West. This is the Total Energies AFCON 2025 qualifier. Witness the beauty of African football. Eswatini versus Mali on Tuesday, 10 September at 3 p.m. Live at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
From 1936 to the future, from Ekaya, Ekasi, to Jozi and Furkan to the world, from dance and poetry to stages filled with our hopes and dreams, from SABC radio stations to cross-border triumphs, from drama, comedy and heart-pounding sport to raise our flag, from culture and spirit to the streets where talent is grown, from generation to generations and the shows that kept us entertained. So, what are you waiting for? Kumbule Kaya. SABC has always been home to our joy, stories, and Msanti's magic. Come home to SABC Plus, still home to the best of who we are.
Mzansi, the Powerball jackpot can't be missed this Tuesday with a huge 100 million rand estimated jackpot. Don't get left behind. Be in it to win by playing Powerball for an estimated 100 million rand jackpot today. Buy your tickets now in store on nationallottery.co.za, the mobile app, cell phone banking, or simply dial *120*7529# for USSD. Panda Pusher Play. Players must be 18 years or older. Play responsibly. Ituba is the proud operator of the National Lottery.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Our guest for this final hour of the show today is Amitav Ghosh, a renowned author, global thinker and environmentalist. He'll be, of course, delivering a lunchtime seminar with Wits University. He's been brought in the country in collaboration with the Presidential Climate Commission and the University of Pretoria. And it's really to get us all thinking a lot more deeply about the climate crisis that we are in, and not only their linkages to the past, but how many of what has happened historically, how much rather of what has happened historically continues to not only echo our present, but if nothing changes, will go forth into the future. Amitav, you were giving an example again of the typical household and how many cars a household should have. You think about society today. I think everybody in a household feels like they need to have their own car, at least if they're, old enough and can drive.
It's absolutely the case. When I first went to the United States from India, that was like 35 years ago, I looked at the streets and I would see people, a single person sitting in a car and driving along. And I used to say to myself, this will never happen in India, because in India, we always used to have cars filled with our friends or family or whatever. And, everyone would drive along in the same car. But now, 35 years later, it's exactly the same situation for middle-class Indians. A family will have 2, 3, 4 cars or other vehicles as well, scooters and so on. But what's even stranger is that if you're in America now, it's no longer the 2-car family. If you drive, across rural America, even in fairly modest towns, towns where people are not particularly rich, you'll see in every house, in the yard, there are 4 or 5 cars. Including, SUVs, including recreational vehicles and so on. So it's almost like people are not content with even having one car for each family member. It's like there has to be one car for the morning, one car for the evening. It becomes like a change of outfits. So it becomes, it becomes a culture which drives itself towards this incredible excess. And you just wonder what will happen to all the skeletons of these cars once they come to be abandoned. I talked before about the problem of wastage. But again, it's really ultimately a pattern of desire. It's a pattern of culture that we've created, an incredibly wasteful and destructive pattern.
You are also going to be launching one of your latest offerings, Smoke and Ashes, Opium's Hidden Histories. And I imagine that too will very much sort of trace the history of opium in the same way that you did with the nutmeg.
Yes, very much so, very much so. But my work on opium goes back a long time to a trilogy of novels I wrote a long time ago called the Ibis Trilogy. And this trilogy was really about the maritime Indian Ocean, And actually, the strange thing that I discovered in writing these books is that the main business of the maritime Indian Ocean in the 19th century was opium. I mean, the British colonial regime in India, essentially it set up this opium trading system whereby it grew a lot of opium in its territories in India and then exported this drug to the Dutch East Indies, but most of all to China. And that's what created this incredible epidemic of addiction in China, and ultimately led to the Opium Wars and the century of humiliation, as the Chinese speak of it. So, opium was absolutely at the center of both colonialism and global capitalism, because many of the first of the earliest industrialists in America actually made their capital in China from trading in opium. It's an astonishing thing, but, very few people know about this history. For example, all of us have heard of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president of the United States and one of the great presidents of the United States. And he came from a moneyed family, but the money in the family essentially came from opium, because his grandfather was one of the biggest opium traders in China in the 19th century. So, these connections go back a very, very long way, and somehow we always omit them when we speak of the history of the 19th century. So it was really a sort of process of digging out this history. But this is not a history that has ended. I mean, the United States today is in the grip of an incredible drug crisis in which heroin also plays a large part, and also synthetic opioids like fentanyl. They have become incredibly sort of important in America. They've created a crisis, and that crisis in turn has led to a political crisis of extreme resentment on the parts of the country that feel neglected. So this is still very much with us.
Wow. So if we're to do anything, we should make sure that we get our hands on the book, but also join in this afternoon session. There's so much that you've done work on, and that is just such a learning, especially listening to some of your insights. I'm going to bring in one of our listeners, Janusz. You're calling from Cape Town. Good morning, Janusz. Please, if you can keep it brief for me.
Good morning, Cathy. Good morning to the author of the books, historic books, and history is my favorite subject, and I just bought a thick book and reading the ancient history and present one. But he mentioned about the colonialism, colonialism, and many of our listeners think that colonialism is only Africa. Colonialism is not only Africa; it's South and North America. It's India, Europe was colonized, I think, but also and Australia. So the colonialism doesn't only affect Africa. The one point, capitalism. He mentioned that he's very critical about capitalism. I came from the communist system, which he doesn't mention anything at all about negative things. So and I know what's happening there, and I knew what's happening there. So maybe please be fair. Also mentioned about the communist system. You mentioned about the biggest polluter in the world is China, which is communist system, by the way, allowing to some private company to do it, and of course India. And many cars are moved from a normal car to the electric car. People in Europe traveling on the bicycle. So it's something happening, and not all the critical things about capitalism and colonialism. Colonialism is not only affecting Africa.
All right,
Janusz. All the listeners.
Sure, thank you for that point. Amitav, if I can ask you to respond, please, briefly.
He's made some very good points. I've actually disagreed with many of the people who say who blame the whole crisis today solely on capitalism, because in fact, through much of the 20th century, two of the largest countries in the world were communist. The USSR and China, and the USSR's record on environmental matters is, in some sense, even worse than that of capitalist countries. So I think it's really ultimately, as I said, it's a crisis of culture. It's a crisis of industrialism. A certain pattern of industrialism which the USSR thought it had to emulate in order to compete with its rivals in the West, and that created also an incredibly serious incredibly serious crisis. So that's, I think, a point that we do necessarily need to remember. So when we start thinking critically about these issues, what we have to really sort of remind ourselves of is that we really do have to rethink the entire pattern of industrialism that we've embarked upon. But one thing I would like to remind your listener is that, yes, I mean, China has created a lot of environmental pollution, and so has India. But the per capita emissions of India and China still remain a fraction of the per capita emissions of the United States or Europe. And if you look at historical emissions, they're a fraction of a fraction. All
right.
So I think we have to consider the number of people involved as well, and it also needs to be said that China is absolutely the global leader in alternative energies of every kind, of solar, of wind power. So it's a much more nuanced picture than just that of pollution.
Amitav Ghosh, we are completely out of time. Let me thank you so much for coming on to the Talking Point. We wish you all of the best with your visit to South Africa, and of course for later today with your seminar. That's where we leave it on the Talking Point for today. Tomorrow, last week we started the conversation around extortionists. We'll continue it tomorrow on Citizens Corner. We'll have Lieutenant General Shadrach Sibia as our guest. He'll be speaking from the police's side. You remember so many different issues that came up last week for the police to respond to. On that note, have yourselves a lovely afternoon. We're back again tomorrow between 9 and midday.
EFC is live this Thursday. The bantamweight title is on the line, live from the World Sports Betting Arena, as the top-ranked divisional contenders and perennial fan favorites Faiz Jacobs and Vince Bembe go to war.
Oh, big rock for Faiz Jacobs. The finish is over. What a win. When he smells blood, he hunts mercilessly for the finish.
EFC is live this Thursday. Watch it on SABC Sport Channel on DTT Channel 4 from 7 p.m. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
This September, S3 brings you thought-provoking nature dockies that will change the way in which you view the world. Prince William embarks on a global mission to ensure our world is left in a better place for future generations, championing action for the natural world and showcasing pioneering local heroes. Prince William, A Planet for Us All, airs Sunday the 15th of September. Channel your inner activist with our selection of premium dockies Sundays at 5 p.m. only on S3. Open Hub.
The students, UJ ladies, want to ensure that they secure 3 points to stay close to the heels of second place UWC ladies. However, Copper Belt ladies plan to fasten their belts tight and escape from the bottom half. This is the Hollywood Bet Super League. Catch them Zanzi Queens of the beautiful game. UJ Ladies FC versus Copper Belt Ladies FC on Saturday 14 September at 11 a.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
The book reading
Please note that the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SAFM presents another episode of A Life of Purpose, written by Luvuyo Wochela and Lumkile Wiseman Kuhlu. The reader is Lerato Velase.
On his arrival, Wiseman moved on to the gold mine compound of nearly 300 workers at the much smaller town of Allen Ridge, not far from Odendalsrus. Allen Ridge was in fact the actual home of the Lorraine gold mine, the biggest of the gold fields. In the 1960s, migrants were streaming in, mostly seeking work on the gold fields and other burgeoning secondary industrial sites. Wiseman initially served a 3-month probation, for which he earned only 2 shillings and 6 pence a day, but afterwards he was employed as mapalan, with heavy responsibilities and only a tiny increase on his original earning. Food and accommodation were provided by the mine, but they were frugal at best and undesirable at worst. Wiseman shared accommodation with 8 drill operators in bunk beds in an adjoining section of the main compound. In a space of 20 months, he had been exposed to 2 of the wickedest South African domicile systems, the vicious prison cells of Fort Glamorgan, Robben Island, and Victor Vesta, and the rudimentary Allen Ridge Gold Mine Compound. Mine compounds, or hostels, iinkomponi in isiXhosa, were not only an effective means of controlling labor by limiting absenteeism at work, but also enabled mine workers to exact pressure on wages since they provided cheap food and makeshift accommodation to their laborers. Contracted workers often received work permits for up to a year and were then expected to return to their rural areas while their contracts were being reviewed for renewal or extension. As a rule, migrant workers had no more than working rights in the urban areas. They had no freedom of movement outside their quarters and had to carry passes and work permits at all times. The system facilitated rigorous control. Access to food within the parsimonious living conditions of the mining compounds or hostels was heavily regulated, and the control and regulation of the food supply was taxing for kitchen store clerks on compounds. Wiseman remembers that the storeroom he looked after, 1 floor above an enormous kitchen, held various types of food. It catered for all 300 migrant laborers of the Allen Ridge mine compound. The carbohydrate and protein-laden foodstuffs, sugar, maize meal, maltabella, and meat were the most used. With full responsibility and control over that storeroom, Wiseman's small desk, equipped with only a record book and pens, stood among bags of food. Dressed in pants, a shirt, and a khaki dust coat, which looked distinctly different from the white coat worn by his white supervisor. He had to be constantly in the storeroom during the day. He was required to release foodstuffs to the kitchen staff, and not only did he have to keep full records of those released goods and those that remained, he also had to know and regulate the size of each rotation for each meal, for all the members of the compound. He couldn't afford to relax the rules or provide preferential treatment. Everything had to be written down. This assignment could have been dreary for someone who had just come out of an atmosphere laden with active resistance politics and political education, but it provided Wiseman with a perfect hideaway from the security police, who seemed to not be aware whether he had left Gala or was still there. Because he had not sought employment through an official recruitment procedure, his records were not fully captured by the mine management, and strangely, they didn't bother to trace his personal details. Hence, his indictment and sentencing remained unknown. He had admitted to the management that he had dropped out of school in his final year, and no more. That he had few visitors at Allen Ridge helped to conceal his personal details. He was content with that, and only frequently sent letters home. And then he decided to register at Damlin College to complete his schooling. Damlin was a correspondence college for school and post-school qualifications, and by early 1960s, it had become one of the leading learning institutions with a number of campuses in Southern Africa, primarily serving those who could only study part-time because they were either in employment or had other commitments. The college was ideal for Wiseman to study through while he was working. Correspondence study prevented him from taking physics and biology, which he had already started at Lovedale, because he had no access to a laboratory. That persuaded him to register for the economic sciences, economics, accounting, mercantile law, mathematics, and the two languages, isiXhosa and English. Damlin also offered him the option to drop the dreaded Afrikaans, which he had never enjoyed at Lovedale. Wiseman was ready to use the year 1965 to salvage the education he could not complete at Lovedale. Wiseman could not afford to divulge his personal details to Damlin either. In his correspondence, he merely provided Damlin with the mine's general private bag address. Quite often, he had to retrieve his letters from a particular point, and fortunately for him, the arrival of new mail for workers was always announced. Under challenging circumstances, he still managed to pass and to attain his senior certificate at the end of 1965. This was a considerable accomplishment, but he did not consider himself exonerated for the episode at Lovedale and was transpired 16 months later. Nor did he find life easy in the Allen Ridge mining compound. He was always conscious of not succumbing to the stifling social environment of a mine compound, even though he himself was working within it. He decided that he had to register for further studies at the beginning of 1966. By now, Wiseman had been at Allen Ridge for more than a year. He was fairly well acquainted with his work environment and fairly content with what he had done to improve himself in spite of trying circumstances. He thought a lot about his Lovedale and prison colleagues, Batini Gwampi, Kaya Gute Magam, and he urged the two to come and seek work in the Orange Free State to evade the security police who watched their homes in Cala. Gwampi and Magam concurred. On their arrival in the Free State, Wiseman had cheering words for them. I told my colleagues in Cala, hey guys, there is life on this mine. I'm sitting here and bored, and the security hasn't arrived yet. Come, if you can't work at the mine, you can both work at the Oppenheimer Hospital in Velkom. Resilience and thinking beyond hardship. The nearness of his friends cheered Wiseman and broadened his social life at Allen Ridge. They would visit each other occasionally, and there was someone to whom he could talk confidentially. He had not told his work colleagues that he was studying with Damlin, and being able to chat about it to his homeboys provided him with social and emotional support in an unfamiliar environment. And he could now do some exploring outside the compound with his friends. Wiseman regarded the diploma in commerce, for which he had registered in 1966, as the springboard to university study. His job was just a means of accumulating some money. Joining the migrant labor system was not intended to be permanent, but a step to the next phase of his life. By mid-1960s, his studies were going well, and he was astonished to realize that he had already made about 300 rands in savings. I looked at my savings and I was shocked to see I had 300 rand. I thought now I'm going to Fort Hare University. I was fired up in terms of motivation, so I decided to apply. Ironically, just as he was thinking to the contrary, there was growing scope for him to continue indefinitely at the Allen Ridge mine. When the manufacturing industry expanded around the Free State goldfields in the mid-1960s, the need grew for a trained and stable workforce able to undertake skilled and semi-skilled labor. Wiseman had done his job well, and he and other trained laborers were now required on a long-term basis by the mining industry because it had become uneconomical to enlist new workers each year. As the numbers of migrant laborers grew, it became essential for those involved in the regulation of operation essentials to be trained and looked after. He reflected about the adversities he had confronted during his last days as a schoolboy at Lovedale College early in 1963. He was already aspiring to go to Fort Hare, but had to settle instead for the testing conditions of some of the harshest prisons in South Africa. Lorraine Gold Mine had become his vehicle for a turnaround, and the 2 years he had spent there had strengthened his resolve. He divulged the news about his future to only a few of his colleagues at Ellenridge, but enlivened by that pending trip to Fort Hare, went home laden with gifts, presents for his grandmother, some goods for his parents, a few rands for various relatives. He was excited to be back home, at this time in a far more relaxed frame of mind. He was only 22 years old, but he had been rapidly propelled into understanding the vagaries of life, and that when it ends somewhere, it begins somewhere else. Return to the University of Fort Hare, 1961 to 1971. At the beginning of 1967, after spending the Christmas holiday with his parents and siblings, Wiseman braced himself to return yet again to the town of Alice and the University of Fort Hare. He had not visited Alice since the malevolent trial of 1963, and although he could not stop himself from reminiscing about that episode, he nevertheless set out eagerly. He had been accepted for a diploma in commerce at Fort Hare, even without a matric exemption. It was an enormous opportunity which he could not afford to miss. Now that I was accepted, I was fired up in terms of motivation, and I had immense belief. I was convinced that given the opportunity, I was capable of achieving anything. The enjoyable and amusing train journeys of his Lovedale days were behind him now, and he was focused on arriving and starting to study straight away. It felt like he was experiencing a renaissance in his life.
That was another episode of A Life of Purpose, second edition, written by Luvuyo Wochela and Lumkile Wiseman Kuhlu. The book is available online on www.kmmr.co.za, KMMR Publishers, and in all leading bookstores countrywide. It is broadcast on SAFM at 11:45 Monday to Thursday on The Talking Point. It is produced for the station by Vovi Patala, read by Lerato Mvelase, technical production Wiseman Manqele and Nanda Khoza.
It's 12 o'clock on Tuesday, the 10th of September 2024. Very warm welcome to Update at Noon here on SAFM. Leading the conversation, I'm Sakina Kamwendo. Coming up in the next hour, well, the Hawks have arrested 4 more police officers for extortion, and 3 men accused of the gruesome murder of 2 women at a pig farm in Polokwane are applying for bail. Coming up in sport.
I'll do my headlines slowly for you. It's another Springbok rugby player that won in the 2019